It's really great to see the turnout. I do this all over the country, and sometimes I go to places where there's only maybe 10 people in the room. So this is really great to see this turnout. I actually, only one time it's happened to me over the years that I've done this, where I went to a university in Georgia, and nobody showed up. So that was a really interesting experience. You know, I just did the presentation to the person from the Multicultural Affairs Department that brought me there. So we just had a one-on-one. You know, this is the first time it ever happened. So this is great to see this large crowd here. A little bit about how I came to do this presentation. More than a decade ago, I started doing diversity work. Worked for an office in New Jersey that was doing a lot of diversity training, and then hired me to be one of the facilitators. So in the process of being trained to be a facilitator, I had to go through all the workshops that they did. And it is in that process of going through those workshops that for the first time, and by then I'm in my mid-30s, for the first time I had to seriously think about race. I had never done that before. I grew up in Lima, Peru, and came to the United States when I was in my 20s. So it really put me in an awkward position because I was trying to do these workshops, trying to learn how to do the workshops, trying to facilitate them, but I wasn't clear about issues of race for myself. So I had to go through a lot of personal investigation to get to a point of having more clarity for myself. And how I did that is I started just looking at my own background, my past, maybe messages that I received at home, growing up in Peru. Then I started looking at my school, and I started looking at the history of Peru, then I started looking at the history of Latin America. And what I realized after doing all of that is that there had been a pattern, a consistent pattern of conditioning for us in Latin America where we think about race, or most of the times we don't overtly think about race, in a particular way, which is why at the age of 35 I would be in these places and not be able to articulate with any sense of clarity what my race was. I wasn't able to do that. I could talk about my ethnicity, I could talk about being Peruvian, I could talk about culture, but race I wasn't able to really talk about. And again, what I was able to uncover was that there was this historical and contemporary pattern of conditioning to think in a particular way around race. So the presentation is a result of my personal exploration, and again, from starting from the personal vantage point, then I moved on to a wider perspective, and this is what I came up with, and I've been doing this for about a decade or so. There's unfortunately nobody out there, because I go to conferences, I go to different places to work around issues of diversity, issues of race, and there's nobody else that is touching on this subject. So it's an unfortunate thing that it's a conversation that it's not had in most places. But before I begin with the presentation, let me see if I can get some help from you in the audience. And I don't know, just by looking at you, I can't tell if there are any Latinos or Latinos in the room. So if there's anybody that identifies as Latino, if you could please raise your hand. Okay, a few. Gus, we'll count you in too, to help us out with this. Okay, so those of you that identify as Latino, if you can answer the question, what is your race?
Guatemala.
Guatemala, okay. Anybody else?
Mexican American.
I'm sorry?
Mexican American.
Mexican American, okay. Somebody else raise a hand. How about you, Gus?
Human.
What?
Human.
You're human, okay. I saw more hands, so come on, help me out, yes. You're confused, but you think it's white.
Yeah.
Okay, kind of like, okay. Now, here's the thing. This is a very small sample, but this is a pattern. There's a consistent pattern. When I ask the question of Latinos and Latinos, everywhere I go, it doesn't matter who they are, it doesn't matter what place in the country, it doesn't matter how old they are, I will get these consistent answers that will be Guatemalan, it could be human, it could be Mexican American, it could be Chicana, it could be Puerto Rican, it could be Latino, Hispanic, and none of those answers are the answer to the question. Because I'm asking about race, I'm not asking about ethnicity, I'm not asking about nationality, I'm not asking about whether you're a human being or not, I can see that. You know, so you, even though you're a little confused and not sure, you were the only one that actually had a concrete answer to the question. But again, that comes out of a specific place. I'm doing that not to point a finger at anybody and say you're wrong, how come you don't really know this answer. It's just simply to highlight how in our community we are very confused about this. Actually, we don't think about it enough to really have an answer that is direct to the question. Okay, so to begin to talk about the concept of race, racial identity in Latin America, I need to go back to Spain. The reason for that is because the concept of race, as we know it, was introduced into Latin America by the Spaniards. It was not something that was present there in the indigenous communities that existed before the Spanish arrived. So the Incas, the Mayas, the Aztecs, and all the other ethnic indigenous groups never thought about race. It was not a concept they had in their imagination. How did that happen? How did the Spaniards bring that over? Okay, so some of you may know the history of Spain, and we know that Spain was, early in the 8th century, invaded by a group of people from Africa. Arabs, the Moors, were black people, Muslims, and all of that will become relevant as I move on with the story. So early 8th century, the Moors come into Spain and begin to take control of the peninsula of Spain. Now at that time, Spain was not a nation. It's not a country of Spain as we know it today. It was simply a group of different kingdoms that existed. The political and social hierarchy, so the folks in control of society at that point, were the church and the kings and the queens. And there were two main groups that existed there in this part of the world, Christians and Jews. And for the most part, they coexisted peacefully. And again, all this is relevant information. I'm just not throwing information just for the sake of throwing you some additional information. Now, so the Moors come in, and at the height of the empire, they controlled most of the peninsula of Spain, except for the northern part. There are some kingdoms up here that stay out of the control of the Moors. It is in reaction to that occupation that you begin to see this language, this official discourse that develops, that begins to show a mindset that is coming up as a reaction to the occupation, that begins to force, if you will, a mindset of racial superiority. And this is how it happens. Again, remember, at the height of the empire, the Moors have set up the most advanced civilization that exists anywhere in the world. So this is certainly a group of people that are very civilized and have a very advanced civilization. Right? Now, in 1095, Pope Urban II said this, that the faithful should hasten to exterminate this vile race from the lands of Christians. And it would be a disgrace if a race so despised, base, and the instrument of demons should so overcome a people endowed with faith in the all-powerful God and resplendent with the name of Christ. Now, why do I show you this? Because remember, the social political hierarchy is controlled by the church and the kings and the queens. So the official discourse coming from the Pope has a tremendous influence in terms of how society thinks about things. A couple of things about this. First of all, I don't know of any leader of any particular faith throughout history that has ever talked about a group of people and say that they need to be exterminated. They might say that they need to be sent back to where they came from. There may be other language, but I have never heard a leader of any faith that would talk about a group of people and say they need to be exterminated. So that's very powerful, very brutal language to use, coming from the Pope. Then he uses the term race. Now the term race, as we know it, the pseudoscientific classification that came up in the 1700s, was not really in place yet in 1095. Right? But you also have to realize that in 1738, when Carl Linnaeus came up with the classification of Asian, white, black, and indigenous, it didn't come out of nowhere. It wasn't like overnight he thought of this and kind of put it out, right? So there's a development that happened over time that in 1738 culminates with this classification that Linnaeus offers as a pseudoscientific classification. So the term race here